At 9:29 p.m. on December 1st, 2018, a young British woman sent her final message to a close friend from a bar in Auckland, New Zealand. "I click with him so well." It was just a date, one that started with a swipe on Tinder, followed by a few online chats, and finally a mutual agreement to meet in person. She couldn't have known that just a few days later, her name would appear on a missing persons report. And after more than a week, headlines around the world would scream, "Body of the missing British backpacker found in Suitcase." That young woman was Grace Millane, 21 years old, on a solo trip around the world before stepping into adulthood. And the man sitting across from her during that date, no one could have imagined, was a compulsive liar, a manipulator, and ultimately the perpetrator of one of the most chilling murder cases in New Zealand's modern history. Grace's story didn't begin with death. It began with trust, the same kind of trust so many of us place in online connections every day. And that trust was betrayed in the cruelest way possible. You're watching the Grace Millane case on Echoes Behind Walls. If this story moved you, leave a like. And if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe and turn on the bell. More haunting stories await. Grace Millane was born in 1996 in Wickford, a peaceful town in the county of Essex, England. The youngest of 3 siblings, she grew up in a loving and nurturing family. Those who knew Grace used the same words to describe her: warm, vibrant, and deeply thoughtful. She had a passion for the arts, especially photography. Grace loved to create, to tell stories through images, and she often used social media as an open journal to capture and express her feelings. After graduating from the University of Lincoln with a degree in advertising and marketing, instead of jumping straight into a career, she chose to take a gap year, a pause to see the world, to live freely before entering adulthood. But her journey wasn't just about exploration. It was also about spreading kindness. Before leaving England, Grace cut off her long hair and donated it to the Little Princess Trust, a charity that makes wigs for children with cancer. A simple act, yet one that reflected who she truly was: someone who cared deeply, someone unafraid to give a piece of herself to bring hope to others. In October 2018, Grace began her solo journey around the world. After spending 6 weeks in South America on November 20th, she arrived in New Zealand, the next stop on her trip. She checked into a hostel called Base Backpackers on Queen Street in Auckland. Then, on November 30th, just days before her 22nd birthday, Grace opened Tinder. She wasn't necessarily looking for romance, perhaps just someone to talk to share a drink with, and experience a bit of connection while abroad. What she didn't know was that this connection would become the last date of her life. The man Tinder matched with Grace Millane that night was Jesse Shane Kempson, a 26-year-old living in Auckland. He introduced himself as a manager in the oil industry, staying at a high-end hotel. Someone who seemed stable, successful, and perfectly fine to have a few drinks with on a Saturday night. But it was all just a mask. The truth? Jesse had just been fired that very morning. Not for poor performance, but for repeatedly lying. He had claimed to be a cousin of a famous rugby player, a professional baseball athlete, and even a terminal cancer patient. He lied to friends, employers, landlords, romantic partners, and, perhaps most dangerously, to himself. People who had lived with Jesse described him as a man obsessed with manipulating others. After his parents' divorce, he lived with his grandparents, not because he was loved, but because the rest of the family had run out of patience for his behavior. He had been evicted multiple times for unpaid rent and disruptive conduct. But Jesse never took responsibility. Instead, he built a new version of himself. More charming, more successful, more desirable, and used it as a mask to enter the lives of others. And Tinder was the perfect hunting ground for someone like Jesse. On Tinder, no one checks your truth. A good photo, a few charming lines, and suddenly, you've got someone willing to meet you in person. That's how Jesse walked into Grace Millane's life. And it's also how a girl made of light unknowingly stepped into darkness. Saturday, December 1st, 2018. Grace Millane left her hostel, Base Backpackers, shortly before 6 p.m. She wore a knee-length black dress, white sneakers, and carried a small handbag, headed toward her date at Sky City, the bustling entertainment complex in the heart of Auckland. Surveillance footage captured the moment she met Jesse Kempson outside the Sky City Hotel. They greeted each other with a friendly hug. Everything looked perfectly normal. There was nothing in that moment to suggest this meeting would end in tragedy. They had dinner at Andy's Bar and Grill. Restaurant CCTV showed them talking, laughing, sipping drinks. The atmosphere was relaxed, even slightly romantic. None of the staff recalled anything strange about the couple that night. Around 7:16 p.m., they left Andy's and moved to a nearby Mexican-style bar. Later, they continued to a third location, the Bluestone Room. Here, the intimacy between them became more visible, sitting close together, holding hands, cheek touches, laughter. Grace looked comfortable. She seemed to trust Jesse. At approximately 8:45 p.m., while Jesse went to the restroom, Grace took out her phone and messaged her best friend in the UK. "I click with him so well." No one knew this would be the last message Grace would ever send. Sometime later, Grace also went to the restroom, leaving her handbag behind on the chair. The CCTV caught Jesse picking up her bag and rummaging through it. It's unclear what he was looking for. Money? Her phone? Or maybe it was just about control. Whatever the reason, this moment was the first clear sign that Jesse wasn't who he appeared to be. By 9:40 p.m., they left the bar. The two walked back to City Life Hotel, where Jesse was temporarily staying. Cameras at the lobby showed them entering together, laughing, holding hands. They embraced as they stepped into the elevator. Then the doors closed, carrying them to the third floor. That was the last time Grace Millane was ever seen alive. December 2nd, 2018. Grace Millane's 22nd birthday. Back in Wickford, England, the Millane family excitedly sent birthday messages to their youngest daughter, who was off exploring the world. They waited for a reply, a smiling photo, a cheerful update, or at the very least, one of her usual heart emojis, just like every year. But this time there was nothing. No message, no call, no social media post. Grace, who had regularly documented her journey every step of the way, had suddenly vanished from the online world. Calls to her phone rang, then went straight to voicemail. Both of her devices were unreachable. Her family began to grow uneasy. The girl they knew, who always stayed in touch, who always messaged when she changed locations, would never go silent, especially not on her birthday. December 3rd passed in quiet concern. By the 4th, the fear became real, and on December 5th, her parents could wait no longer. They contacted New Zealand police and officially reported Grace as missing. The Auckland police acted quickly. They visited Base Backpackers, the hostel where Grace had been staying. Staff confirmed that she hadn't returned to her room since the evening of December 1st. Her belongings, clothes, bags, personal items, were still there, untouched. At first, investigators remained hopeful. Maybe she went out with new friends and forgot to check in. Maybe her phone died. Maybe it was just a small miscommunication. But then they began reviewing CCTV footage from the streets, from hotels, from restaurants and bars, and slowly the pieces came together. Grace Millane never left the City Life Hotel after entering with Jesse Kempson. She walked in, but she never walked out. December 5th, the same day Grace Millane was reported missing, Jesse Kempson was called in for questioning by the police. At first, he stayed calm. He claimed that after their date, they had parted ways amicably around 10 p.m., and each went their separate ways. But the police had already reviewed the footage. They had seen Grace and Jesse enter the City Life Hotel, take the elevator together to the third floor, and they knew. Grace never came back out. Faced with evidence, Jesse began to change his story. He admitted that they had sex in his hotel room. According to him, Grace had initiated a form of rough sex involving bondage. He claimed she asked him to strangle her, and after that, he went into the bathroom and fell asleep. When he woke up the next morning, Grace was lying motionless and no longer breathing. If it had truly been an accident, his next actions didn't look like those of an innocent man. On the morning of December 2nd, Jesse was caught on CCTV leaving room 308, walking into the atrium on Elliott Shopping Center and purchasing a large suitcase. After that, he bought cleaning supplies, bleach, wipes, disinfectant. He returned to the hotel, rented a carpet cleaner, and cleaned the entire room, as if nothing had happened. That evening, he was seen pushing the suitcase, with Grace's body inside, on a hotel luggage trolley, down through the lobby. No panic, no visible distress. His movements were calculated, composed, and chillingly cold. The next day, Jesse bought a shovel at a hardware store. He drove a rental car out to the Waitakere Ranges, a remote forested area west of Auckland. There, he buried the suitcase under a secluded bush. Returning to the city, Jesse carried on as if nothing had happened. He washed his clothes, cleaned the rental car, returned it, and then got back on Tinder to meet another woman. During that date, he casually brought up burying someone, disturbing the woman so deeply that she left the encounter immediately. Things only got worse from there. When police examined Jesse's phone, they discovered a series of Google searches made after Grace had already died. Rigor mortis, flesh-eating birds, large bags near me, Waitakere Ranges, and most horrifying of all, he had taken photographs of Grace's body. By now, the police had no more doubts. They tracked Jesse's GPS data to the forest area, and at that precise spot, buried in the soil, they found the suitcase. Inside it was the body of Grace Millane. On December 8, 2018, Jesse Kempson was officially arrested and charged with murder. His trial began almost a year later, in November 2019. Throughout the proceedings at the Auckland High Court, Jesse maintained his innocence. He stuck to his story that Grace's death had been an accident during a consensual act of violent sex. His defense team even tried to shift the trial's focus onto Grace's personal life, examining her sexual history, a classic example of victim blaming aimed at minimizing the murderer's responsibility. But the prosecution stood firm. They laid out the evidence before the jury. Jesse's deliberate cover-up, his Google searches, the photos he took of Grace's body, and most importantly, the time it takes to strangle someone to death. Forensic experts confirmed.
For a total of 5 to 10 minutes, at some point of which she lost consciousness and would have become, under his hand hold, unconscious and limp and lifeless, and he had to carry on. And if that's not reckless murder in this country, ladies and gentlemen.
On November 22, 2019, the jury deliberated for just 5 hours before returning with the verdict. Jesse Kempson was found guilty. He was sentenced to life in prison, with a minimum of 17 years before eligibility for parole. But the story didn't end there. Once Jesse's identity was made public, 2 other women came forward. They recognized him as the man who had previously raped and abused them. In 2 additional trials held in 2020, Jesse was again found guilty and sentenced to another 11 years in prison, added to his original sentence. In November 2020, Grace's father, David Millane, passed away from cancer, just 2 years after losing his daughter. But at least he had lived to see the man who murdered Grace held accountable. In court, Grace's mother, Jillian Millane, delivered a heartbreaking statement. I imagine the terror and pain she must have felt. I feel guilt that I wasn't there. Grace died alone, in fear, in the hands of someone she had trusted. Justice may have been served, but grief remained. Yet, instead of letting their sorrow turn into bitterness, the Millane family turned their pain into purpose. They launched the Love Grace campaign, collecting handbags filled with essential items, donated to women fleeing domestic abuse. Grace's name no longer stood for tragedy alone. It became a symbol of compassion, resilience, and love that endures beyond death. Grace Millane's murder shook New Zealand to its core. Even Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern issued a national apology to her family.
On behalf of New Zealand, I want to apologise to Grace's family. Your daughter should have been safe here, and she wasn't, and I'm sorry for that.
But more than that, the case forced the world to ask, in an era where we connect with a single swipe, what are we leaving unguarded? A dating app doesn't kill people, but a killer can hide behind one. And sometimes, all he needs is a charming photo and a sweet message. Grace believed, and she paid with her life. But the light in her heart, the light of a woman who lived fully, still shines. Thank you for staying with us through this story. If you found it meaningful, please like, share, and subscribe to support the channel and help more people hear these voices.